The financial strain was starting to feel unbearable. Amara had promised herself she would make it, but each passing day brought more doubt. She sighed and replied to Kyla, "Amara, I'm trying, but it's not easy. I'm feeling the weight of it all. This has to work." Kyla's reply came instantly. "Kyla, don't forget how far you've come. You've already proven more than they ever expected. Now, just finish what you started." Amara put the phone down and rubbed her eyes, trying to focus. She was almost done, but it wasn't just the technicalities of the prototype weighing on her mind. The emotional toll of everything, being ignored by Tesla, feeling dismissed at every turn, had left scars that ran deep. But she couldn't afford to dwell on that. Not now. Days passed in a blur. The prototype was almost complete. The last phase of testing was scheduled for the morning of the big presentation. She was nervous. More than nervous. She was terrified. Each time she ran a test, her hands would shake and her heart would race. If it didn't work, if the battery failed, she would have nothing left. This was her one shot. The day before the presentation, Amara stood in the lab, finalizing the connections on the test unit. It was late. She was the last one there. The lab was silent, save for the low hum of the equipment. She leaned over the battery, her fingers trembling as she adjusted a wire. She ran through the calculations again in her head, double-checking every connection, every number. If the power surge was too much, the unit would short-circuit. If the battery couldn't handle the load, all of this, everything she had worked for, would fall apart. A sudden sound broke her concentration, a soft click of the door. She spun around to see Carlos from X Energy standing in the doorway, his face unreadable. "I didn't expect to see you still here," Carlos said, stepping into the lab. "How's it going?" Amara straightened, wiping the sweat from her forehead. "I'm just finishing up. The test tomorrow is critical. If it doesn't work, everything's over." Carlos nodded, his eyes scanning the lab equipment. "I get it, but you've come a long way, Amara. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've made it this far. You've pushed boundaries. That's more than most people ever do." Amara felt a flicker of gratitude, but the words didn't offer the comfort she wanted. The pressure was overwhelming. She couldn't afford to fail. She just couldn't. "I appreciate the encouragement, Carlos, but I don't have time for platitudes," she replied, her voice taut. "I've got one chance, and if I mess this up, I don't get to try again." Carlos paused, then walked over to her. "No one's asking you to be perfect, but you've done more than anyone else could have done, and you've done it your way. Don't lose sight of that." The tension between them was palpable, a mixture of exhaustion and anticipation. Amara could feel herself on the edge, teetering between the drive to succeed and the fear of failure. But something about Carlos's words resonated with her. She had come this far, and she couldn't let fear dictate her actions. The next morning arrived, and the lab felt more like a pressure cooker than a place of innovation. Amara was joined by Sarah Winters, Carlos, and Jean, all gathered around the test unit as Amara prepared to run the final test. She took a deep breath, hoping to steady herself, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment where everything would either click or collapse. "Ready?" Sarah asked, her voice stern, but there was something else in it. Curiosity, a hint of genuine interest. Amara nodded, adjusting the wires one final time before flicking the switch. The screen in front of her blinked to life, and the lab was filled with the soft hum of the battery coming online. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. She watched the metrics on the screen, holding her breath as the numbers crept higher. Then, there it was, the first red flag. The power surge was higher than expected. Amara's heart leapt into her throat. She quickly adjusted the voltage, but it was a dangerous game. If she didn't bring the numbers down in time, the entire test could fail. The battery's design was supposed to be self-regulating, but if there was an error in the output, "Amara, you need to adjust it now." Carlos shouted, his voice laced with urgency. With trembling fingers, Amara punched in the adjustments. Sweat trickled down her brow as she watched the numbers stabilize. Too close. For a long moment, the lab was dead silent. Amara's ears rang with the sound of her pulse as she stared at the screen, waiting for the inevitable crash. But then, slowly, the numbers leveled out. The energy output remained stable. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes locked on the screen. There was no smile, no immediate relief in her expression. But Amara could see the shift, the subtle recognition in her eyes. It was working. "You did it," Sarah said, her voice softer than it had been before. There was still caution in her tone, but there was something else, respect. "We need more testing, but this is a good sign." Amara released a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. For the first time in months, hope surged through her veins. This wasn't the end, but it was a breakthrough. As they moved into the next phase of testing, Amara's mind raced. The prototype wasn't perfect, not yet. There were still bugs to work out, still tweaks to make. But something had changed. She had crossed the threshold into new territory, and the world of X-Energy was watching. For the first time in weeks, Amara felt like the weight on her shoulders wasn't dragging her down. There was still so much to prove, so much at stake. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't backing down. Not now. As she glanced over at Sarah, she saw a look of approval. It was fleeting, but it was there. Enough to push Amara forward. This wasn't just about the prototype anymore. This was about proving to herself and to the world that she belonged. The next few days were a whirlwind. After the success of the final prototype test, Amara felt an overwhelming mixture of relief and nervous anticipation. She knew that she had taken a major step forward, but there was still so much left to do. The prototype had passed the first phase of testing, but Sarah and the team had made it clear. They needed more results before committing to full-scale production. The pressure to perfect her design had never been more intense. Amara was back in the lab, going over the feedback from X-Energy. The team had pointed out minor adjustments, but there was one recurring concern that kept appearing in every report: the scalability of her battery. The prototype was showing promise, but at full scale, it might not handle the energy demands of large-scale operations. If she couldn't address that, the project would stall. She would lose everything. But as she sat there, poring over calculations and revisions, the stress was starting to show. Her hand trembled as she adjusted the wire connections. The pressure of trying to make everything perfect was overwhelming. She had sacrificed so much to get here, and the thought of failing now was unbearable. She needed a breakthrough, but the answers were eluding her. Amara's thoughts were interrupted when she heard a voice behind her. It was Kyla, standing at the lab door, a bright smile on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. "How's it going?" Kyla asked, stepping into the lab and leaning against the workbench. Amara forced a smile, but it didn't quite mask her frustration. "I'm stuck. I thought I had it all figured out, but there's a problem with the scalability. If I can't fix it, the whole project's going to fail." Kyla didn't say anything at first. She simply walked over and placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. "You've been working nonstop for days. Maybe you need a break." Amara shook her head, standing up and pacing around the lab. "I don't have time for a break. If I don't fix this, everything will fall apart. I'll lose the opportunity to prove myself, to prove that I belong here. Do you understand? This isn't just about a job anymore. It's about everything I've fought for." Kyla's expression softened, but her voice was firm. "Amara, you've already proven more than most people ever will. You're a genius. Don't let fear of failure dictate your next move. You've made it this far for a reason." Amara stopped pacing and met her friend's gaze. Kyla was right. The fear of failure had been driving her for so long that she had started to lose sight of what had gotten her here. Her passion for innovation, her vision for the future. She needed to stop running from failure and start embracing the process, trusting her abilities. She exhaled slowly, a feeling of clarity washing over her. "You're right. I've been so afraid of failing that I forgot why I started this in the first place. It wasn't for them, it was for me, for my vision. I've been so focused on their expectations that I forgot to focus on what I can create. Kyla smiled, giving her a quick hug. That's the spirit. Now, show them who you are. The next morning, Amara stood in front of X Energy's executives, ready for the final presentation. The laboratory was filled with anticipation, and the air was thick with the weight of the moment. Sarah Winters, Carlos, and Jean were all seated at the table, their eyes trained on her as she prepared to present the final version of her prototype. Amara had made the necessary adjustments. The scalability issue had been addressed, just barely, but now she had one final test to run. She wasn't sure if it would work, but she couldn't back down. She had already come so far, and if this test didn't work, she would still have to find a way to make her vision come to life. "Are you ready, Amara?" Sarah asked, her voice calm but expectant. Amara nodded, trying to steady the racing beat of her heart. "Yes, I am." She initiated the test. The lab was silent except for the hum of the machinery. The final stage of the test was complex. She needed to demonstrate that the battery could handle both high power output and sustained performance at the scale they needed. If it worked, X Energy would have the proof they needed to invest in mass production. But if it didn't, Amara couldn't allow herself to think about that. She had already put everything she had into this moment. The power surged through the system. Amara's fingers hovered over the controls, eyes glued to the screen. The data was coming in, and so far, it was stable. The system was holding steady. The battery was performing beyond expectations. For a brief moment, she allowed herself to hope. Then, the numbers began to shift. A ripple of panic shot through Amara as she saw the voltage climb higher than expected. Her heart thudded in her chest. If the system overloaded, "Adjust it," Carlos shouted, his voice laced with urgency. Amara's mind raced. She had just a few seconds to make the necessary changes before the entire test could collapse. She was about to enter a critical override, but her fingers were shaking. The pressure was suffocating. If she failed this adjustment, the damage would be irreversible. Her hand hovered over the keyboard, and then, with a burst of clarity, she hit the keys. The numbers shifted immediately, stabilizing as she made the final adjustment. For a brief moment, the screen flickered. Then, everything went silent. Amara held her breath, waiting. She couldn't look at the faces of the X Energy team just yet. The data refreshed. Stable. She exhaled slowly. The battery had passed the test. The numbers were consistent, reliable. It had worked. She had done it. Sarah's voice cut through the silence, but it was different now. There was a note of respect, even admiration in her tone. "Congratulations, Amara. You've exceeded our expectations. This technology could be the future of sustainable energy." Amara felt a rush of emotions, relief flooding her veins. She had done it. She had proven herself. But there was still one last hurdle to clear. X Energy had recognized her potential, but she still needed to secure her place in the industry, prove that she wasn't just a brilliant inventor, but a leader. As the meeting came to an end and the team began to gather their things, Sarah turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "Amara," she said, pausing, "we're not just offering you funding for your prototype. We want you to be a part of something bigger, leading our next generation of projects. We want you to drive the change." Amara's heart skipped. This wasn't just a job offer. It was an opportunity to build the future. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The world was watching, and Amara was ready to lead. She wasn't just part of the conversation anymore. She was shaping it. As she walked out of the lab, she couldn't help but smile. For the first time in her life, Amara felt like she had arrived. The road ahead was still uncertain, but she was no longer afraid of the unknown. She had earned her place at the table. Amara stood on the rooftop of X Energy's headquarters, the city sprawling beneath her in a kaleidoscope of lights. The wind was cool against her skin, the rhythmic hum of the metropolis below blending with her thoughts. She had done it. She had made it. She was now part of the future of energy, the very industry she had once been so intimidated by. But with success came new challenges, and as she stared into the horizon, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had led her here. Months ago, she had been just another face in the crowd, a bright, ambitious young woman with big ideas and bigger doubts. Fear had driven her, but it had also confined her. She had been afraid of being judged, of failing, of not being good enough. Her whole life, she'd been told that the doors were closed for someone like her. Society had already placed her in a box, and she had done her best to work around it. But now, she realized something important. Those barriers hadn't just been built by the world. They had been built by her own fears. Amara felt her phone buzz in her pocket, breaking her reverie. She pulled it out and saw a message from Kyla. "Kyla, hey, I saw the announcement. I knew you'd do it. You're changing the game." Amara smiled, her chest swelling with gratitude. Kyla had been there for her from the beginning, through the sleepless nights, the failures, and the moments of self-doubt. She had been the anchor when Amara felt like the tides of uncertainty were pulling her under. "Amara, thanks, Kyla. It feels unreal, but I know this is just the beginning." Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, and for a moment, she thought about all the people who had doubted her. She could almost hear the voices of the ones who told her she didn't belong in tech, that she didn't have what it took to lead. She thought about the subtle ways the industry had rejected her at every turn. From the hiring managers who'd glanced at her resume and tossed it aside, to the tech conferences where she'd been ignored in favor of someone with more connections. It was a tough road, but now she was at the top, and it felt like she had climbed out of the shadows of all that doubt. Kyla's next message came through. "Kyla, you've earned it, Amara. But just remember, don't forget us little people now that you're all fancy and important." Amara laughed softly and typed a response. "You'll always be the real MVP. Couldn't have done this without you." Her fingers hovered over the screen for a moment longer. There was so much she still wanted to say, but it would have to wait. Right now, she needed to focus on what was next. She had a big meeting scheduled later that day with Elon Musk himself. A conversation she had never anticipated would happen in her wildest dreams. It wasn't just the momentous nature of the meeting that had her mind racing. She had proven herself to X Energy, but Elon Musk represented something larger, a symbol of the innovation and ambition she had once only dreamed about. He was a man who had redefined industries, and now she had the chance to sit across from him. It wasn't lost on her how much this meeting could shift the course of her career. It was unprecedented, and Amara knew that it could either propel her forward or set her back, depending on how she played it. Later that afternoon, Amara found herself in the lobby of SpaceX's headquarters, the massive, gleaming building reflecting the sky above her. She was escorted to a sleek, modern conference room, where Elon Musk was waiting for her. She took a deep breath as she entered the room, her heart pounding in her chest. This was a moment that would either define her future or leave her questioning everything she had worked for. "Elon," she said, extending a hand, her voice steady despite the fluttering nerves. "Thank you for meeting with me." He stood, shaking her hand firmly, his eyes scanning her face as though sizing her up. "Amara, I've heard a lot about you. Your prototype is impressive. X Energy tells me you really pushed the envelope." Amara nodded, trying to suppress the adrenaline that was rushing through her. She wasn't sure whether this was a good or bad sign. Elon Musk had a reputation for being demanding, and she knew he didn't hand out praise lightly. "I've always believed in pushing the boundaries of what's possible," she replied. "Sustainability is the future, and I want to be part of shaping that future." Elon leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "I admire that. But there's one thing you need to understand, Amara. Innovation isn't just about creating something new. It's about making sure it works at scale, at a global level." His words sent a ripple of uncertainty through her. She had already taken the scalability concerns seriously, but Elon's emphasis on them made the weight of his expectations even clearer. "I understand that," Amara said, trying to keep her voice steady. I'm aware of the challenges, but I'm confident that the technology can scale. It's just a matter of time and resources. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was something about the way he looked at her that made her feel like he wasn't just trying to critique her. It was as if he was testing her resolve, gauging her ability to lead. "You're not wrong," he said after a long pause. "But here's the thing. People don't trust new technology until it's proven, and they don't trust new people in the field until they've shown they can handle the weight of leadership. What you've done so far is great, Amara. But if you want to truly make a difference, you'll have to do more than just prove that your prototype works. You'll need to lead people, drive change, and shape the future. And that comes with its own set of obstacles, especially for someone like you." Amara felt her stomach tighten. She had been preparing for this moment. But hearing Elon Musk himself acknowledge the challenges she faced felt like a bucket of cold water. "I'm ready," she said, her voice unwavering. "I've been ready for a long time." He studied her for a moment longer before giving a short nod. "Good. That's what I wanted to hear." Elon leaned forward, and for a brief moment, Amara saw a different side of him. Less the billionaire mogul, more the mentor. "Amara, you're on the right track. But you'll face a lot of resistance. People will doubt you, question your decisions, and challenge your leadership. The world will tell you you're not qualified. But you get to decide whether or not you'll let them define your worth." Amara felt a surge of determination. Everything she had gone through, every rejection, every challenge, had led to this moment. She wasn't going to let anyone's doubts hold her back. "Not now. I won't let anyone tell me I don't belong," she said firmly, her voice filled with resolve. Elon's eyes gleamed with approval. "I like that. Remember that when things get tough, because they will. But if you keep pushing forward, you'll prove them all wrong." The words resonated deeply with Amara. She had fought for this moment, and now it was time to stop doubting herself. As the meeting wrapped up and she walked out of the room, Amara felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about creating a sustainable future anymore. It was about leading, and she was ready to embrace that responsibility. The world had doubted her, but Amara had learned something crucial. Her worth wasn't defined by their expectations. It was defined by her vision, her persistence, and the courage to forge her own path, no matter how difficult it might seem. The road ahead would be tough, but Amara had already proven she was up for the challenge. Now, it was time to show the world what she was truly capable of. Months passed, and Amara's journey continued to evolve at an astounding pace. The meeting with Elon Musk had been a turning point, a moment that marked the beginning of her rise as a leader, not just an innovator. The challenges she had once feared no longer seemed as insurmountable. She had learned to trust her instincts, embrace the obstacles, and most importantly, own her place in the industry. X-Energy had been just the beginning. Since then, she had expanded her technology to new industries, partnered with global organizations, and attracted the attention of major players in sustainable energy. Her name had become synonymous with the cutting edge of clean technology, and every time she walked into a room, the respect she had earned was palpable. But it wasn't just about the accolades or the partnerships. It was about the people she had inspired, the doors she had opened for others like her, and the change she was driving in a world that so often tried to silence those who didn't fit the mold. It was late one evening when Amara sat down in her office at X-Energy headquarters, reflecting on how far she had come. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow across the skyline. She leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers lightly against the desk. The path ahead was still filled with uncertainty, but for the first time, she was at peace with the journey. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment she was ready for, had finally arrived. Her phone buzzed with a notification, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was from Kyla. "Kyla, I just saw the feature on you in Forbes. Look at you, changing the game. You've come so far. You deserve every bit of it." Amara smiled and quickly typed a response. "I couldn't have done it without you. You believed in me before anyone else did." Her thoughts turned back to the advice Elon had given her that day in the conference room. His words had stayed with her, especially the part about the resistance she would face. At the time, it had felt like a daunting reality, but now it was just part of the process. People would always have their doubts, but that was no longer her problem. The only thing that mattered was the work she was doing and the impact it was making. As Amara reflected, the door to her office creaked open, and Sarah Winters, the CEO of Exa Energy, walked in with a smile. "How's it going, Amara?" she asked, her tone friendly but with a hint of business urgency. "Great," Amara replied, her voice steady. "I've been looking over the new projections. I think we can scale the technology even faster than we initially anticipated. We'll need to work on expanding our team, though. It's time to get ready for the next phase." Sarah nodded, clearly impressed. "I've been meaning to talk to you about that. The board is thrilled with your progress. We want to move forward with full investment in your next project. But there's something else I've been thinking about." Amara looked up from her desk, raising an eyebrow. "What's that?" "We're bringing in someone to oversee global outreach. We'd like you to take that role." The proposal caught Amara off guard. Oversee global outreach? She had been so focused on the technical side of things that the idea of managing a global team seemed daunting. But as she thought about it, she realized that it was the next logical step in her growth. The opportunity would give her the chance to shape the future on a much larger scale. She took a deep breath, weighing the decision. "I'm ready for it," she said finally, her voice calm and sure. "It's time to build something that can change the world on a global scale." Sarah smiled, her eyes gleaming with approval. "I knew you'd say that. You're going to do great things, Amara." As the months went by, Amara's influence grew. Exa Energy's investment in her work had paid off, and her technology had revolutionized energy storage solutions across the world. She had overseen multiple successful projects, working with governments, international organizations, and major corporations. Her efforts had provided millions of people with access to sustainable, clean energy, transforming communities, and giving hope where there had been none. But it wasn't just the work itself that made Amara's heart swell with pride. It was the people she had met along the way. From the young black engineers who saw her as a role model, to the women in tech who found her story empowering. Amara had become more than just an inventor. She had become a symbol of possibility. In every city she visited, in every boardroom she entered, there was one theme that remained constant. The world was ready for change, and it was time to lead it. And Amara knew that she would never be alone on this journey. She had the support of a team, the respect of industry giants, and the belief of those who had stood by her from the very beginning. The final chapter of Amara's story wasn't about the technological advances she had made or the accolades she had received. It was about the impact she had on the world. She had proven that it wasn't about where you came from or who doubted you. It was about the drive to create something better. The belief that change was not only possible but necessary. One crisp morning, Amara stood before an audience at a global climate summit, preparing to deliver the keynote address. The room was filled with some of the brightest minds in the world, and as she stepped up to the podium, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was her moment, not just to share her work, but to inspire others to believe in their own potential. She began her speech, her voice clear and steady. "A year ago, I was a young woman with a dream that seemed impossible in so many ways. But I've learned that the impossible is just a challenge waiting to be solved. And now, we have a chance to reshape the world together. The future is in our hands, and it's time to build something sustainable, something that will last not just for us, but for generations to come." As she spoke, Amara realized that the journey she had started years ago had only just begun. There would always be challenges ahead, but the path was no longer about proving herself. It was about creating the change she had always believed was possible. The world was watching, and Amara was ready to lead it. Takeaway: the story of Amara is a testament to resilience, perseverance, and the power of self-belief. It reminds us that no matter the obstacles, the doubters, or the struggles we face, We can shape our own destinies by staying true to our purpose and pushing forward in the face of adversity. The journey may be long and uncertain, but the impact we leave behind has the potential to change the world. It's not about where you start. It's about how far you're willing to go.